called poor at the family meeting. So I unveiled the property portfolio. Aunt Margaret's word was a poison-tipped dart, meant to humiliate me into silence, but I didn't flinch. I didn't plead. Instead, I smiled, reached for my phone, and let the projector descend. Each image that flickered on that screen was a hammer blow to her smug world duplexes, townhouses, warehouses, commercial blocks, all mine, all meticulously documented. In that gilded dining room, I showed them the truth. The only poverty here was in their understanding of what real wealth looked like. The word landed on the polished mahogany table with the definitive thud of a judge's gavel. Poor. It wasn't shouted. It was worse. It was delivered with the casual, dismissive pity one reserves for a stray animal caught in the rain. Aunt Margaret, matriarch of the Donovan dynasty and warden of its suffocating traditions, let the word hang in the air, suspended in the glittering light of the crystal chandelier above us. Her smile was a thin, merciless line, her eyes sweeping over me, taking in my simple black dress, the absence of heirloom diamonds at my throat, the quiet stillness of my hands resting in my lap. Of course, we can't all be blessed with the Donovan business acumen, she continued, her voice a syrupy poison that coated every gilded surface of the formal dining room in their Greenwich, Connecticut estate. Some of us have simpler ambitions. Isn't that right? Claire, it's admirable, in its own way, to be content with so little. We just worry. Darling, that you're falling behind. It's a bit sad to see you so, well, poor. Silence. Not a heavy, uncomfortable silence, but a light, effervescent one, filled with the unspoken agreement of my cousins, my uncles, my other aunts. They sipped their vintage Bordeaux, the ruby liquid swirling in their glasses, their faces a carefully curated gallery of faux concern. My cousin, Mark, who had just spent 10 minutes boasting about crashing his third Porsche, gave me a look that was meant to be sympathetic but dripped with condescension. His wife, Tiffany, adjusted the multi-carat rock on her finger, its facets catching the light and throwing tiny, mocking rainbows across the table. My heart wasn't pounding. It had turned into a cold, heavy stone in my chest. For years, I had endured this, the annual family meeting, a ritual designed not for connection, but for the reinforcement of a rigid hierarchy. It was a performance where everyone played their part. Aunt Margaret was the queen, dispensing judgment and favor. My uncles were the loyal dukes, managing their fiefdoms within the larger family empire. My cousins were the jousting knights, competing for glory with tales of acquisitions, bonuses, and extravagant vacations. And I was the court jester, the quiet, strange, unassuming niece who had politely declined a gilded cage, a vice president title at Donovan Industries right after college, the one who lived in a modest apartment in a less fashionable part of the city, who drove a sensible sedan, who didn't speak the language of stock options and hostile takeovers in their world, a world built on the glittering edifice of perceived wealth. My refusal to participate was not seen as a choice, but as a failure. My quietness was not a strategy. It was an admission of defeat. They didn't know that my modest apartment was the first property I ever bought. A duplex I renovated myself on weekends, living in one half while the rent from the other paid the mortgage. They didn't know my sensible sedan was paid for in cash, a deliberate choice to keep my overhead low. They didn't know that while they were talking about quarterly earnings reports, I was studying zoning laws. While they were at charity galas being photographed, I was on site with contractors, negotiating lumber prices and approving blueprints. My entire adult life had been a masterclass in quiet accumulation, a secret rebellion against the very philosophy that filled this room. I didn't build my success to be displayed. I built it to be a fortress of financial independence so absolute that I would never, ever need to ask these people for anything. A fortress whose walls were now so high, so thick, that their petty arrows could no longer pierce them. But the word poor, it wasn't an arrow. It was a poisoned dart, aimed not at my finances, but at my spirit. It was meant to humiliate, to reinforce my designated place at the bottom of their pyramid. I looked at Aunt Margaret, truly looked at her. Her power was a performance, propped up by designer clothes and a legacy she had inherited, not built. Her wealth was loud, demanding, and deeply insecure. She needed this audience, this echo chamber of familial sycophants, to feel real. A slow, cold fire began to burn in my veins, melting the stone in my chest. For 7 years, I had held my tongue. For 7 years, I had allowed them to believe their narrative because their opinion was, I thought, irrelevant to my reality. But I was wrong. Their disdain wasn't just an annoying byproduct of a family dinner. It was a deliberate, suffocating weight they placed on me, year after year. Tonight, I would shrug it off. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, the cool liquid a balm to my suddenly dry throat. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for a flustered defense, a tearful retreat. They were expecting the same old Claire, the one who would shrink under their gaze. They had no idea who I had become while they weren't looking. The silence stretched, and in it, I made a decision. It was time to stop being a secret. It was time to unveil the portfolio. Not with anger, but with the cold, hard, and undeniable precision of a balance sheet. The meeting wasn't over. In fact, behind it was just about to begin. My feud with Aunt Margaret began, as most things in the Donovan family do, with money. Not the lack of it, but the philosophy behind it. To be a Donovan was to believe that wealth was a megaphone. It was meant to be shouted, displayed, and used as a weapon of social dominance. Our family business, Donovan Industries, didn't just manufacture high-end electronics. It manufactured an image of untouchable success, an image my aunt curated with the obsessive zeal of a museum director. She had taken over as CEO after my grandfather retired, and where he had been a shrewd but fair businessman. Margaret was a performer. Board meetings were her stage, press releases were her scripts, and the family was her supporting cast. She believed in the Donovan way, a life of conspicuous consumption that served as free marketing for the brand. The sports cars, the charity balls, the sprawling estates, they weren't just perks. They were obligations. My original sin, as she once called it at a Christmas dinner, was committed when I was 22. Fresh out of college with a degree in finance, a corner office on the 40th floor of the Donovan Tower was waiting for me. It was the crown jewel offered to every promising heir. My cousins had accepted their positions with glee. I, however, had politely declined. I remember the meeting in her cavernous, white marble office. She sat behind a desk the size of a small car, her expression unreadable. "I don't understand," she said, steepling her perfectly manicured fingers. "This is your birthright. I want to build something myself." "Aunt Margaret," I explained, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, something from the ground up, a flicker of something disdain, perhaps, or amusement crossed her face. "Building something, Claire. The foundation has been laid for you. All you have to do is move in. This romantic notion of starting from scratch is for people who don't have a choice. It's proletarian." She savored the last word, letting it drip with condescension. "You'll be back," she had concluded, waving a dismissive hand. "The world is harsh. You'll find out soon enough that a Donovan without the Donovan name behind them is just another person struggling. You'll be poor and you'll be sorry. That conversation was the spark." Her words, meant to be a prophecy of my failure, became the blueprint for my success. I didn't want to build something in spite of her. I wanted to build something she couldn't understand. She saw value in stock tickers and brand recognition. I decided to find value in something tangible, something real. I found it in drywall, copper piping, and forgotten neighborhoods on the cusp of revival. While my cousins were receiving trust fund disbursements as down payments for their luxury condos, I was pooling every dollar I had from 3 different part-time jobs. I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee, my worn-out copy of The Intelligent Investor my only companion. My first purchase was a derelict duplex in a part of Stamford everyone else overlooked. The bank barely approved my loan. My family, had they known, would have been mortified. The work was brutal. I spent my weekends tearing out moldy carpets, my nights learning how to patch plaster from online videos, my hands permanently stained with paint and grime. There was nothing glamorous about it. I remember one terrifying night during a winter storm in 2018 when a pipe burst in my tenant's unit at 3 a.m. I was there in 20 minutes, wading through freezing water with a wrench, while my cousin Mark was probably posting photos from a ski lodge in Aspen. That was the difference between us. Their wealth was a given, an entitlement. Mine was earned in inches, through sleepless nights and calculated risks. Each new property was a silent victory. A 4-unit building in Bridgeport, financed by refinancing the first duplex, a small commercial space in New Haven, a block of townhouses in a developing suburb. I never used the Donovan name. I built my own credit, my own reputation as Claire Donovan, a serious, no-nonsense investor who always closed her deals. My company, Blackwood Properties, was a deliberately understated name, registered quietly, its assets held in a series of anonymous LLCs. It was my fortress, built brick by brick, invisible to the world my family inhabited. They only saw the surface, the sensible car, the simple clothes, the quiet niece who had nothing interesting to contribute at family gatherings. They mistook my silence for shame, my frugality for failure. They couldn't comprehend a strategy of stealth wealth because their entire existence was predicated on its opposite. And now, sitting at this table, their judgment raining down on me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fire I felt moments ago had cooled into something hard and clear, like steel. Aunt Margaret thought she was delivering a final verdict on my life. She had no idea she was simply providing the perfect opening remarks for the real meeting. The annual shareholder report for Blackwood Properties was about to be presented, and she, along with everyone else in this room, was about to find out exactly what being poor looked like. Just when I thought the spotlight of scorn had moved on, Aunt Margaret tapped her wine glass with a perfectly manicured nail. The light, ringing sound silenced the murmurs of dessert orders and brought all eyes back to her. The faux concern had vanished from her face, replaced by an expression of regal magnanimity. She was about to hold court again. "As you all know," she began, her voice resonating with practiced importance, "my primary focus as CEO has been securing the Donovan legacy, not just for our generation, but for the ones to come." She smiled, a gesture that didn't reach her eyes. Our children and their children deserve to inherit the same foundation of success that we were blessed with. A ripple of self-congratulatory agreement went around the table. My Uncle Robert, head of the European division, nodded gravely. "A noble goal, Margaret, a truly noble goal." "Which is why," she continued, her gaze sweeping the room before landing, with surgical precision, back on me, "I am thrilled to announce the formation of the Donovan Next Generation Trust, a new financial vehicle designed to ensure prosperity for our grandchildren. Upon the birth of any grandchild, a significant seed investment will be placed in their name, managed by the family office, guaranteeing them a future of opportunity." The room erupted in a chorus of delighted gasps and appreciative murmurs. My cousin Mark, who had 2 young children, looked like he'd just won the lottery. "Margaret, that's That's incredibly generous," he stammered. "It is," she agreed, allowing a moment for the applause to swell and fade. "It is an investment in our future. However," she paused, letting the silence hang heavy. This was her art, the dramatic turn, the masterful control of her audience. "There are, of course, conditions. This is a trust built on the principle of continued success, not passive inheritance. It is a reward for those who actively uphold the Donovan standard." Her eyes, cold and sharp as ice picks, were locked on mine. "Therefore, eligibility for a grandchild's entry into the trust is contingent upon their parent meeting one of two criteria." She held up a single finger. "One holding a senior executive position within Donovan Industries or one of its primary subsidiaries." She held up a second finger. "Or two demonstrating a personal, independently verified liquid net worth of no less than $20 million. The air was sucked out of my lungs. This wasn't a casual insult anymore. This was a declaration of war. A carefully constructed, legally binding document designed to right me, and any future I might have, out of the family narrative forever. She had weaponized legacy. She had found a way to call me poor in perpetuity, to brand my hypothetical children as lesser-thans before they were even conceived. The $20 million figure wasn't arbitrary. It was a number she believed to be so far beyond my reach as to be an impossibility, a cruel joke at my expense. The complicity in this room was suffocating. No one flinched. No one saw the breathtaking cruelty of the maneuver. They saw only a shrewd business decision, a way to protect the bloodline from dilution. As I'd once heard my uncle put it, they were so blinded by their own privilege that they couldn't see a guillotine when it was being polished right in front of them. My cousin Tiffany leaned over to Mark and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "Well, that settles that, doesn't it? Such a shame. Some people just don't think about their children's futures." The sting of that comment was sharper than Margaret's initial jab. It wasn't just about my supposed failure anymore. It was an attack on my character, my foresight, my very capacity as a potential mother. They were painting me as selfish, as someone whose simple ambitions would actively harm her own offspring. I looked down at my hands, clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. The fortress I had built suddenly felt less like a shield and more like a cage. I had hidden my success so well, wrapped it in so many layers of LLCs and quiet holding companies, that now, in the moment it mattered most, it was invisible. I had played the long game. Believing that financial independence was the ultimate checkmate, I hadn't anticipated that my opponent would change the rules, moving the goalposts into a future I hadn't even begun to build yet. The cold, clear resolve I'd felt earlier was now boiling. This was no longer about correcting a misconception. This was about defending my honor, my choices, and the family I hadn't even had yet. Aunt Margaret was smiling her thin, triumphant smile at me. She thought she had won. She thought she had finally, irrevocably, put me in my place, a place outside the golden circle of the Donovan legacy. She had no idea she had just handed me the key to burn it all down. For a long, humming moment, the world distorted. The murmur of my family's voices faded into a dull roar, like the sound of the ocean heard from inside a seashell. The glittering chandelier overhead blurred into a smear of light. All I could see with perfect, painful clarity was Aunt Margaret's face, etched with the smug satisfaction of a predator who has successfully cornered her prey. She had built a cage of words and money and legacy, and I had walked right into it. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to push back my chair, mutter a weak excuse, and retreat to the anonymity of the night. I could feel the familiar sting behind my eyes, the hot flush of humiliation creeping up my neck. This is what they wanted. They wanted to see me break. They wanted the quiet, unassuming Claire to finally crumble, validating their years of condescension for a heartbeat. I almost gave it to them. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, urging me to fold. What was the point? I had my independence. My success was real. Why did I need their validation? Why was I letting their poisonous games get to me? But as I looked down, my hands were no longer clasped in my lap. My right hand had instinctively clenched into a fist, my nails digging into my palm. The faint, sharp pain was an anchor, pulling me back from the brink. And with it came a memory, vivid and cold. It was from 4 years ago, a brutal February night. A boiler had failed in a 10-unit building I'd just acquired in a foreclosure auction. It was 2 a.m. The temperature was dropping below zero, and I had families with young children calling me in a panic. The 24/7 HVAC company I had on contract was swamped and couldn't get a technician there for hours. I didn't hesitate. I threw on my heaviest coat over my pajamas, grabbed my tools, and drove through the snowstorm myself. I spent the next 3 hours in a freezing, dusty basement with a headlamp strapped to my forehead and a printed-out repair manual. My fingers numb, my breath pluming in the icy air. I managed to get the pilot light relit and the system limping along until the professionals could arrive at dawn. When I finally got back to my own apartment, covered in grease and shivering, I didn't feel tired. I felt a sense of profound, unshakable competence. I had solved the problem. I had kept my tenants warm. I had been accountable. That was who I was, not the caricature they painted of me at this table. My success wasn't an abstract number on a page. It was rooted in sweat, grit, and responsibility. It was built on a foundation of solving real problems for real people, not on the gossamer threads of inherited status and public perception, and the trust, the $20 million threshold. It wasn't a guillotine. It was an insult to the woman who had single-handedly restarted a boiler in a blizzard. It was an insult to the negotiator who had convinced a stubborn landowner to sell a key parcel of land after 6 months of relentless, polite persistence. It was an insult to the strategist who had built a portfolio that generated more passive income in a month than my cousin Mark's bonus provided in a year. The emotional storm inside me didn't just pass. It underwent a strange and terrifying alchemy. The hurt, the shame, the anger, they began to cool, to compress, to harden. They fused into a single, diamond-hard point of clarity. My fortress wasn't a cage. My silence wasn't a weakness. They were strategic assets I had held in reserve, and Aunt Margaret, in her infinite arrogance, had just given me the perfect, unassailable reason to deploy them. She thought she was playing chess, cornering my king. She didn't realize I was playing a completely different game, and I had just been waiting for her to move her queen into the kill box. I slowly unclenched my fist. The trembling in my body ceased. I took a deep, centering breath, and when I exhaled, I let go of every last vestige of the meek, apologetic niece they thought they knew. I lifted my head, my spine straightening, and met Aunt Margaret's gaze across the table. The flicker of a smile, my own smile, not hers, touched my lips. It was small, barely there, but it was sharp enough to cut glass. A subtle shift in the room's atmosphere followed. A few of my cousins noticed my changed demeanor. The pity in their eyes was replaced by a flicker of confusion. Something was wrong with the script. The jester was no longer playing her part, with deliberate, unhurried grace. I reached for my clutch purse, sitting on the empty chair beside me. I placed it in my lap. They probably thought I was getting ready to leave. I wasn't leaving. I was preparing. I unclasped the purse and slipped my hand inside, my fingers finding the cool, smooth glass of my smartphone. The turning point wasn't a shout. It was a quiet click as I unlocked the screen. It was the soft tap of my thumb opening a secure, encrypted folder labeled simply, Assets. The war wasn't going to be fought with insults. It was going to be won with data. "Claire, darling," Aunt Margaret's voice sliced through the charged silence, dripping with manufactured concern. "You look a little pale. If you need to call a car, please don't feel you have to stay. We understand. This kind of financial discussion can be overwhelming." Her words were meant to be the final nail in my coffin, a dismissal disguised as kindness. It was the perfect exit cue she had written for me. But I wasn't following her script anymore. I didn't look up from my phone. "That won't be necessary, Aunt Margaret," I said, my voice even and calm. It was a voice they had never heard from me before, not the timid whisper of the past, but the measured tone of a CEO in a boardroom. "On the contrary, your announcement about the trust is incredibly timely. I've been meaning to conduct a portfolio review, and there's no better time than the present. After all, families should be kept appraised of such things, shouldn't they?" A confused silence fell. Before anyone could process my words, I swiped and tapped the screen. A soft whirring sound came from a discreet panel in the ceiling, a sound no one had ever heard during these family dinners. A pristine white projector screen descended smoothly, covering a large ornate painting on the far wall. Simultaneously, the large flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace flickered to life, mirroring the image that was now being cast onto the screen. The first image to appear was a simple, elegant logo, a stylized oak tree with deep roots, and beneath it, the words "Blackwood Properties, Q4 2023 Asset Overview." A collective gasp went through the room. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. "What is this?" my Uncle Robert demanded, squinting at the screen. "This," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs, "is my answer to the eligibility question." I swiped the screen of my phone. The logo was replaced by a high-resolution photograph of a handsome, fully renovated duplex, my first property. Item 1, 142 Elm Street, Stamford, a 2-unit residential property, acquired July 2017, current market valuation $1.2 million. Mortgage satisfied in full, 2021. I swiped again. A picture of a modern 4-unit apartment building appeared. Item 2, the Bridgeport Collection, a 4-unit residential complex, acquired via foreclosure auction, May 2019, post-renovation valuation $3.5 million, debt minimal. Swipe. A sleek, glass-fronted commercial building. Item 3, the New Haven Commerce Center, leased to a regional tech firm on a 10-year triple-net lease. Generates stable revenue, acquired 2020, valuation $6.8 million. Swipe, swipe, swipe. With each flick of my thumb, another piece of my secret empire materialized on the screen in front of them. A block of townhouses in a booming suburb, a portfolio of single-family rentals scattered across Fairfield County, a small industrial warehouse near the docks. Each slide was identical in its format, a crisp photo, acquisition date, current valuation, and a summary of its financial performance. The numbers grew, accumulating with a relentless, staggering force. The room was utterly silent, save for my voice, narrating the presentation with cold, dispassionate precision. The clinking of silverware had stopped. No one was drinking their wine. They were frozen, their faces a tableau of disbelief. I saw my cousin Mark, his face ashen, looking from the screen to me and back again. The cost of his crashed Porsche wouldn't even cover the property taxes on one of my mid-tier holdings. His wife, Tiffany, was staring at her diamond ring as if seeing it for the first time, its brilliant sparkle suddenly looking dull and insignificant. I paused on a map of Connecticut, dotted with dozens of color-coded pins, each one representing a Blackwood Properties asset. The portfolio is geographically diversified to mitigate regional market risk, I stated, as if speaking to a group of investors, Total number of rental units 112. Commercial square footage 85,000. Current occupancy rate 98%. Then, I swiped one last time. The final slide was simple, stark, and brutal. It contained no pictures, only black text on a white background. Blackwood Properties, consolidated financials, unaudited. Total asset valuation, $38,750,000. Total liabilities, mortgages and liens, $6,200,000. Claire Donovan, net worth, $32,550,000. The number hung in the air, an irrefutable $32 million rebuttal to the word poor. I finally lifted my gaze from my phone and swept it across the stunned faces of my family. I let my eyes rest on Aunt Margaret. The mask of regal authority had shattered. Her face was pale, her lipstick a garish slash of color against her bloodless skin. Her mouth was slightly agape, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else, the raw, terrifying recognition of a complete and total loss of power. She had tried to write me out of her story, only to discover I was the author of a saga she couldn't even comprehend. I switched off the projector with a final tap. The screen retracted into the ceiling, revealing the ornate painting once more, as if nothing had happened. "So," I said, my voice dropping back to a conversational, almost gentle tone, "about that trust, the $20 million threshold you mentioned, it won't be a problem." I picked up my clutch purse and stood up, my movements smooth and deliberate. "Please have your family office forward the relevant documents. My attorney will need to review them before I sign anything." I looked directly at Aunt Margaret, whose entire world had just been dismantled by a PowerPoint presentation. "Thank you for dinner," I said, the ghost of a smile playing on my lips. It was illuminating. I didn't slam the door on my way out. I closed it softly behind me. The quiet click of the latch, a far more definitive sound than any slam could have been. I walked down the long, manicured stone path to my sensible sedan, the cool Connecticut night air feeling clean and sharp in my lungs. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the shock waves emanating from that dining room, a seismic event that had just fractured the very foundations of the Donovan dynasty. I could picture the scene with perfect clarity, the stunned silence, followed by the inevitable explosion. Not of anger directed at me, but of blame ricocheting between them. Uncle Robert, ever the pragmatist, would be furious at Margaret for her tactical blunder, for provoking a sleeping dragon. Mark and Tiffany would be scrambling, their minds racing to recalibrate their position in this new world order. How could they get on my good side? The fawning would begin shortly. The first volley came before I had even reached the Merritt Parkway. A text from Mark. "Claire, that was incredible. Always knew you had it in you. We should catch up. Drink soon." I deleted it without replying. By morning, the floodgates had opened. My phone, usually a quiet tool for business, became a weapon of mass notification. There were a dozen missed calls from various uncles and cousins. There were emails long, rambling emails dissecting the misunderstanding at dinner, praising my discretion and brilliant strategy. They were no longer speaking to the poor niece. They were addressing a peer, a power player whose favor they now desperately needed to curry. Their praise was as hollow as their previous pity. The only person I didn't hear from was Aunt Margaret. That silence was more telling than all the noise combined. It meant she was reeling, processing the totality of her defeat. It meant she hadn't yet figured out her next move. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived at the P.O.L. box I used for my business. It was from the Donovan family office. Inside were the documents for the Next Generation Trust. No note, no letter of explanation, just the cold, legal papers. It was a silent, desperate offering. A white flag. They still didn't get it. They thought the money was the point. They thought that by offering me a seat at their table, the one they had just tried to kick me away from, all would be forgiven. They thought my performance was an audition. It wasn't. It was a resignation. The person who finally broke the silence was not Margaret, but my father, her younger brother. He was a quiet man, long since beaten down by the family's overbearing dynamics, a passive observer in his own life. He called me, his voice trembling. "Claire, I had no idea. I'm so proud, and so ashamed of how we've treated you." His apology was the only one that felt real, tinged with a lifetime of regret for his own inaction. We spoke for an hour, the first real conversation we'd had in years. It was a small, fragile bridge built across the chasm the family had created. It was 2 weeks after the dinner that Margaret finally requested a meeting. Not with a summons, but with a formal email from her assistant to mine, an entity whose existence she had just discovered. She asked if I could find the time to meet her for coffee. I chose the place, a small, independent coffee shop in a neighborhood I was currently redeveloping. My turf. She arrived looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, the designer suit hanging loosely on her frame. The power that had always radiated from her was gone, replaced by a brittle weariness. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your presentation was effective," she said, stirring a sugar she didn't need into her espresso. "It was factual," I replied, taking a sip of my black coffee. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face for a hint of triumph, of malice. She found none. "Why, Claire?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why hide it for all these years? You could have had anything, a respected voice in the family, a position on the board." "You're still asking the wrong question. Aunt Margaret," I said softly, "you think I did this to prove something to you. I did this to prove something to myself. I didn't want a voice in a family that only values voices that shout. I didn't want a position on a board where my worth was inherited. I wanted to build something that couldn't be given to me and couldn't be taken away." I leaned forward slightly. "For years, you all defined success by what you could show. I defined it by what I could control. My assets, my time, my life. You called me poor. The irony is, I was the only one in that room who was truly free." A single tear traced a path through her expensive foundation. It wasn't a tear of remorse, but of loss. The loss of her narrative, of her control. I did sign the trust documents. My attorney, a sharp woman I paid handsomely for her loyalty and expertise, made one small amendment. I added a clause, legally airtight, stating that all funds, profits, and dividends deposited into the trust on behalf of my future children would be irrevocably and annually redirected to a charitable foundation I had established, the Blackwood Grant, dedicated to providing seed capital for young, underprivileged entrepreneurs. I was using the Donovan tool of legacy to create opportunities for people like the woman I used to be, the one starting with nothing but grit and a dream. The family meetings, I'm told, are different now, quieter. The swagger is gone. I wouldn't know. I haven't attended one since. My victory wasn't in silencing them. It was in realizing I no longer needed to hear what they had to say. My name is Claire Donovan, but that name no longer defines me. My success does. Not the number on a balance sheet, but the quiet satisfaction of walking through a dusty, forgotten building and seeing not what it is, but everything it can become.